The evening felt ordinary, but my heart pounded like a war drum. I sat at the kitchen table, rubbing my temples as exhaustion weighed on me. That's when Josh, my only son, walked in with a glass of water. "Here, Mom. You must be tired," he said, his voice unusually soft. I took the glass but hesitated. Something felt off. The way he looked at me, expectant, almost impatient, sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't just Mother's intuition. It was fear. Because just yesterday, I discovered something that shook me to my core. Josh had secretly taken out a massive life insurance policy in my name. A policy worth millions, with him as the sole beneficiary. And now, as I held this glass of water in my trembling hands, a terrifying thought crossed my mind. Is this just a drink? Or is this my death sentence? I forced a smile and raised the glass to my lips, but I didn't drink. Instead, I watched Josh's face. Would he seem relieved? Would he look away? Because if I was right about what was happening, then I was living with a son who wanted me dead. I set the glass down carefully, pretending to wipe my mouth. My heart pounded so loudly I thought Josh might hear it. "Thanks, sweetheart," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. Josh smiled, but there was something off about it. Forced. Too polite. I watched as he turned away, casually scrolling on his phone like nothing was wrong. But I knew better. Yesterday changed everything. It started when I was cleaning the house. Josh had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter. Normally, I respected his privacy, but a notification popped up on the screen. Policy approved. $2,500,000 beneficiary Josh Miller. I froze. A life insurance policy? In my name? At first, I thought it was a mistake. A scam. But as I clicked on the email, I saw it clearly. Josh had taken out a massive life insurance policy on me, without my knowledge. And the worst part, it was recent. Just 3 months ago. I scrolled through the details, my breath shallow. Premiums, payout conditions. Everything pointed to one terrifying conclusion. Josh would get millions if something happened to me. Suddenly, my headaches, dizziness, and nausea from the past few weeks didn't feel random anymore. I remembered how Josh had been acting different lately. He started making my coffee in the morning, something he never did before. He insisted on cooking for me, always watching me take the first bite. He bought me special health vitamins, ones he personally prepared. Had I been blind to the signs? Had my own son been slowly poisoning me? Now, as I sat at the table, staring at the untouched glass of water, one thought consumed me. If I don't act fast, I might not wake up tomorrow. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. The evidence was right in front of me, yet I still couldn't believe it. Josh, my baby boy, the child I raised alone after his father's death, was trying to kill me? No, it felt impossible. But then again, so did the insurance policy in my name. I needed proof. And more importantly, I needed to stay alive. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen, trying to act normal. Josh was already there, whistling as he prepared my morning coffee. "Morning, Mom. How did you sleep?" he asked. "Not great," I admitted. His eyes flickered for a moment. "Was that disappointment? Maybe you're just stressed. You should take your vitamins. Here, I got them ready for you." He handed me 2 small white pills. I stared at them in my palm. How many times had I taken these, trusting him? "You always take such good care of me, Josh," I said with a smile, pretending to swallow the pills. I palmed them instead, stuffing them into my pocket. He watched me carefully, then nodded, satisfied. But something felt off. His movements were too rehearsed, his smile too forced. It was then I realized. He wasn't just waiting for me to get sick. He was waiting for me to die. That afternoon, I took the pills to a pharmacist friend at the local drugstore. "Can you test these for me?" I asked, my voice trembling. He raised an eyebrow but agreed. I went home, nerves shot, paranoia creeping in. Every sip of water, every bite of food, suddenly, it all felt like a trap. Then, just as I was about to go to bed, my phone rang. It was the pharmacist. His voice was urgent. Panicked. "Linda, don't take another one of those pills. They've been tampered with." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" I whispered. "There are traces of a substance that, in small doses, won't kill you right away, but over time, it could shut down your organs. It's slow, almost untraceable." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. This was it. Proof. Josh wasn't just hoping I'd die naturally. He was poisoning me. My breath caught in my throat. The room spun around me as I gripped the edge of the table for support. Josh was poisoning me. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It wasn't a mistake. It was real. And I was living under the same roof as the person trying to kill me. Are you sure? I whispered into the phone. Positive, the pharmacist said. You need to stop taking anything he gives you. I swallowed hard, my hands shaking. I need you to do one more thing, I said. Can you get me a full report? Something official. I can. But Linda. He hesitated. Be careful. If he knows you've figured it out, he might do something drastic. I hung up and took a deep breath. I needed to act smart. The next morning, I forced myself to act normal. I sat at the kitchen table, watching as Josh prepared my coffee, just like every other morning. You feeling any better, Mom? He asked, setting the cup down in front of me. I faked a tired smile. A little. I think the vitamins are helping. His expression lit up slightly, as if he were pleased with himself. I lifted the coffee to my lips, pretending to take a sip. Then I set it down. Actually, Josh, I said, trying to sound casual. I've been thinking about writing a will. His body stiffened. A will? Yeah, just in case. It's always good to be prepared, right? I chuckled softly. Josh tried to keep his expression neutral, but I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. Yeah. You're still young, Mom. You don't need to worry about that yet. Still, I shrugged. I think I'll meet with a lawyer next week, just to make sure everything's set up properly. Josh's grip on his coffee mug tightened. His knuckles turned white. I didn't have to be a mind reader to know what he was thinking. If I wrote a will, there was a chance he wouldn't get everything. And if that happened, he might run out of patience. I needed to get out of the house. But first, I needed more proof. That afternoon, I called my lawyer and set up an appointment. Then I made another call. To the police. I have reason to believe my son is trying to poison me, I said. Silence. Then the officer responded. Ma'am, that's a serious accusation. Do you have evidence? I do, I said firmly. And I'm going to get more. I knew Josh was watching me. He was waiting. And soon he would make his next move. I barely slept that night. Every creak in the house, every shadow outside my door, it all felt dangerous. Josh had no idea that I knew what he was doing. But if he got even a hint that I was onto him, I knew what would happen next. I wouldn't wake up. The police wanted more proof before they could act. That meant I had to play my part a little longer. So, the next morning, I smiled at Josh like nothing was wrong. Morning, sweetheart, I said, settling at the table. He was already making my coffee. Morning, Mom. You seemed restless last night, he said casually. I forced a chuckle. Probably just stress. The will and everything. I watched him closely. His hands paused for a second before he slid the coffee cup toward me. That hesitation was all I needed to see. Drink up, he said with an easy smile. I lifted the cup, pretending to take a sip. But this time I had a plan. After breakfast, I dumped the coffee into a plastic bag and sealed it. Then I made a quick stop at the pharmacy. Can you test this for me? I asked my friend. He gave me a long look. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Just check. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I sat in my car, heart racing, waiting for his call. It came within the hour. Linda, there's something in your coffee. My stomach twisted. Poison, I whispered. Yes. And not just any poison. This one works fast. You'd be dead within hours. This wasn't just slow poisoning anymore. Josh was done waiting. He was ready for me to die today. And that meant it was time to turn the tables. I drove straight to the police station with the evidence in hand. Officer, I have what you need, I said, placing the coffee sample and pill report on the desk. The officer's expression darkened as he read through the report. We'll handle this from here, he said. No, I interrupted. You need to let me go home. If Josh thinks nothing is wrong, he'll slip up. The officer hesitated. You're putting yourself in danger. I know. I took a deep breath. But if we do this right, he won't suspect a thing until it's too late. And so, with the police watching from a distance, I went back home. I stepped into the house, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure Josh could hear it. But I couldn't let him see my fear. I had to act normal. Josh was in the living room, casually scrolling through his phone. He looked up with a smile that no longer felt warm to me. Hey, Mom. You were out for a while. Yeah, just running errands, I said lightly, setting my purse down. I picked up groceries. Thought I'd make your favorite dinner tonight. His eyes lit up. Steak and mashed potatoes? Of course, I smiled. His guard was down. Perfect. I went to the kitchen and started preparing dinner. My hands shook slightly as I chopped vegetables, but I forced myself to stay steady. Everything had to be just right. Once the food was almost ready, I called out, "Josh, can you grab me a glass of water?" I heard him get up and move toward the kitchen. My back was turned as I plated the food, listening carefully. Clink. The soft sound of ice cubes dropping into a glass. The faint sound of liquid pouring. I turned just as he handed me the drink. "Here you go, Mom." I smiled, taking it. I brought it to my lips, but stopped just before drinking. "Oh, silly me," I laughed. "I forgot to take my vitamins. Let me grab them." I walked to the counter, setting the glass down right next to another identical one I had prepared earlier. Then, with my back to Josh, I switched the glasses. My heart raced as I turned back, holding the glass he meant for me. Josh was watching me closely. "You okay, Mom?" "Yeah," I smiled. "Just tired." And then, I handed him the poison glass. "Here, have some water too. You look thirsty." Josh hesitated for just a second, a brief flicker of doubt in his eyes. But then he shrugged and took a sip. I held my breath. He drank half the glass before setting it down. Cold. Inside, I felt like I was going to collapse. It worked. Now, all I had to do was wait. 15 minutes into dinner, Josh's face paled. He blinked rapidly, bringing a hand to his stomach. "Ugh, I don't feel so good." He pressed a hand to his head. "Dizzy." He stumbled to his feet, knocking over his chair. "Mom, something's wrong." His voice was shaky now. I set my fork down and looked at him calmly. "Oh, sweetheart," I said softly. "That's strange. You only drank water, right?" His eyes widened. Realization hit. He stared at the glass on the table. Then at me. No. His breathing became rapid. "What did you do?" I stood up slowly. "I didn't do anything, Josh. But I think you did." His legs buckled, and he grabbed the edge of the table for support. "Mom, call an ambulance." I tilted my head. "Oh, sweetheart. Why would I? You always told me to trust you." "So I did." The front door burst open. Police officers rushed inside. Josh barely turned before they grabbed him, forcing him into cuffs. His face contorted in pain, anger, and fear. "You poisoned me," he gasped. I shook my head. "No, Josh. You poisoned yourself." The officers dragged him toward the door as he shouted, struggling. "Emma, please." But I turned away. Because the truth was, I had already lost my son long before this night. Josh's screams echoed through the house as the officers dragged him out. "Emma, you can't do this. I'm your son." I stood there, gripping the back of my chair, forcing myself not to crumble. Because the truth was, I didn't feel like he was my son anymore. Not after what he had planned. Not after he tried to kill me. One of the officers turned to me. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I let out a shaky breath and nodded. I think so. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't over. The next few hours were a blur of police reports, medical tests, and statements. They confirmed what I already knew. The substance in the water was poison. A deadly one. Josh had planned everything down to the last detail. A search of his room revealed even more horrifying things. Internet searches. How long does poison take to work? Can poison be detected in an autopsy? A printed insurance policy with my name on it, and his name as the sole beneficiary. Receipts for the poison, bought in small amounts over the last few months. It wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment crime. Josh had been planning my death for a long time. Hours later, I sat in the police station, watching Josh from behind a glass window. He was hunched over, hands cuffed to the table, refusing to look up. An officer leaned in. "Your mother knows, Josh. We have everything. Just tell us why." For a long time, he said nothing. Then finally he whispered, "She was worth more dead than alive." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had raised this boy. I had sacrificed for him. And to him, I was just a check waiting to be cashed. Tears burned my eyes, but I blinked them back. I would not cry for him. Not anymore. Before I left the station, an officer asked, "Do you want to speak to him?" "You don't have to." I thought about it. Then I nodded. One last time. They led me into the cold, gray room. Josh finally looked up. His face was pale. He looked less like my son and more like a stranger. "Mom." His voice was small now. Desperate. "Please, you have to get me out of here." I stared at him. "Why, Josh?" My voice was calm. "Empty. Why would you do this?" He swallowed hard. Mom, I was drowning in debt. This was my way out. But I never meant. Stop. My voice was firm. You meant every bit of it. Tears welled in his eyes. I'm your son. I stood up. No, Josh. My heart ached, but I pushed through the pain. You stopped being my son the moment you decided my life was worth more to you dead than alive. I turned and walked out. And this time, I didn't look back. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, strangers, even distant family members who had never cared before, all gathered, eager to hear about the son who tried to kill his mother for money. I sat in the front row, my hands clasped in my lap. I wasn't here to cry. I wasn't here to plead for him. I was here to make sure justice was served. Josh was led in, shackled at the wrists. He looked different, thinner, paler, weaker. But I felt nothing. The judge entered, and the trial began. The prosecution wasted no time. They laid out everything. The life insurance policy Josh took out in secret. The search history detailing his months of planning. The poison receipts traced directly to him. My own testimony. The moment I switched the glasses and watched him poison himself. Josh's lawyer tried to argue that it was all a mistake, that he never intended to actually go through with it. But the jury wasn't buying it. Neither was I. When it was Josh's turn to speak, he looked straight at me. Mom, please. I messed up, but I'm still your son. The courtroom was silent. I took a deep breath, then stood up. No, Josh. You stopped being my son the moment you put a price tag on my life. His face twisted in anger. That's when I knew I had made the right decision. Josh wasn't sorry. He was just sorry he got caught. The jury didn't take long. We find the defendant guilty. Josh's shoulders slumped. The judge's voice rang through the room. Joshua Carter, you are hereby sentenced to 25 years in prison with no possibility of parole. It was over. As I walked out of the courthouse, the weight on my chest felt lighter. Josh had made his choices. Now he would live with them. And I would live too. For myself. For the first time in a long, long time. The trial was over. The cameras stopped flashing, the reporters moved on to the next big story, and the world seemed ready to forget. But I couldn't. How do you erase the knowledge that your own child, the person you raised, loved, and sacrificed for, wanted you dead? For money. I still woke up in cold sweats, replaying that moment, Josh handing me the glass of water. Would he have watched me die? Would he have called 911, pretending to be the grieving son? Or would he have just waited calmly for the insurance payout? I had to stop thinking about it. I had to move on. But moving on felt impossible. After the verdict, family members I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly reached out. I always knew Josh had issues. I just never said anything. It must be so hard for you. You should come visit us. Now that Josh is gone, you don't have anyone to look after you. Maybe we can help. Help. These were the same people who had ignored me for years. Where were they when I was struggling? When I needed support? Now they wanted to play the role of the caring relatives? I shut it down fast. I wasn't interested in fake sympathy. One afternoon, my phone rang. An unknown number. I answered hesitantly. Mom. My breath caught. Josh. They let me call you. Just once. Please don't hang up. I gripped the phone, my heart pounding. What do you want, Josh? I need you to come visit. Please. I don't have anyone else. A part of me wanted to say yes. To see him. To understand if he felt any remorse. But the other part, the part that remembered the cold calculation in his eyes that night, knew better. Josh, I need to move on. And so do you. Silence. Then a low, choked whisper. So you're really leaving me? My eyes burned. But my voice was steady. No, Josh. You left me the day you decided my life was worth more to you dead than alive. And with that, I hung up. And for the first time in months, I felt free. Weeks passed. Life became quieter. No more reporters, no more courtrooms, no more whispers from distant relatives pretending to care. I was finally learning how to live for myself. Then one morning, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name. I felt a chill run down my spine as I opened it. Inside was a letter. From Josh. Mom. I guess this is it. You won't visit me. You won't call. You've erased me from your life. I don't blame you. I've spent weeks thinking about what I did. At first, I was angry at you for turning me in. But then I realized, I turned myself in the moment I decided you were worth more dead than alive. I can't take it back. I can't fix what I broke. But I need you to know something. It wasn't just the money. I was drowning in debt, yes. But it wasn't just about getting rich off your death. It was about proving to myself that I could win. that I could control something in my life. I grew up watching you struggle, Mom. I saw you working 2 jobs, skipping meals so I could eat, doing everything to make sure I had a future. And I threw it all away. I know you won't forgive me. I wouldn't either. But if you ever think of me again, don't think of me as the monster who tried to take your life. Think of me as the broken son you once loved. Because that's all I ever was. I'm sorry. Goodbye. I held the letter in my shaking hands. Tears burned my eyes. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that there was still a part of my son that was good. But could I forgive him? Could I ever look past the fact that he tried to kill me? I took a deep breath, folded the letter, and placed it in my drawer. For now, I didn't have an answer. But one thing was clear. I was no longer a mother to Josh. And that realization hurt more than anything. Days turned into weeks. Life was finally starting to feel normal again. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the weight of Josh's letter. Did I still love him? Could I ever forgive him? I buried those questions deep, convincing myself that I had moved on. Then, one evening, I got a call that sent a chill down my spine. "Ma'am, this is Officer Reynolds. We need to speak with you immediately. It's about your son." My heart stopped. Josh. I rushed to the police station, my mind racing with 100 terrifying possibilities. Had something happened to Josh? Had he hurt himself? Or had he escaped? When I walked into the station, the officer's face was unreadable. "There's been a development," he said. He slid a photograph across the desk. I gasped. It was a picture of Josh, but he wasn't in prison. He was sitting at a restaurant, laughing, right across from a man I didn't recognize. "This was taken yesterday," the officer said. "Your son was spotted outside of prison." I felt dizzy. "That's impossible. He's serving 25 years. "How?" The officer sighed. "Someone pulled strings, ma'am. Someone powerful." I clutched the table. "Who?" The officer hesitated, then said something that made my blood run cold. "Your ex-husband." My ex-husband, Ethan Carter, had walked out of our lives over 20 years ago. No child support. No calls. No visits. As far as I was concerned, he was dead to us. But now, somehow, he had the power to get our son out of prison. Why? What was he planning? And most importantly, what was Josh going to do now that he was free? I had a horrible feeling. I hadn't heard the last of him. I couldn't sleep. The news of Josh's release had shattered any sense of safety I had built. How did Ethan, a man who disappeared from our lives decades ago, suddenly have the power to pull our son out of prison? And more importantly, why? I had no answers. But I knew one thing: Josh was out there. And after everything that had happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't done with me yet. The next morning, my doorbell rang. I hesitated. Every instinct told me not to answer. But I needed to know. I opened the door, and my breath caught in my throat. Ethan. He looked older, sharper, his once boyish charm replaced with a cold confidence. "Hello, darling," he said smoothly. Like he hadn't abandoned me. Like he hadn't let me raise our son alone. Like he hadn't just unleashed Josh back into the world. I clenched my fists. "What do you want?" Ethan smirked. "Let's talk inside, shall we?" I didn't trust him. But I needed answers. I let him in, keeping my distance. He walked around my house like he owned it, running his fingers along the furniture. "Still living modestly, I see." "Cut to the chase, Ethan. Why is Josh out of prison?" He chuckled. "Straight to business. I always admired that about you." I crossed my arms, refusing to play his game. "Josh is my son too, you know. Did you really think I'd let him rot in prison?" I laughed bitterly. "You let him rot without a father for 20 years. Why do you suddenly care?" Ethan's smirk faded. His eyes darkened. "Because he's useful to me now." A chill ran down my spine. "Useful?" I echoed. "Josh's potential," Ethan said. "He's smart, he's desperate, and he'll do anything to prove himself." He leaned in, his voice a whisper. "And I have big plans for him." My stomach turned. "What kind of plans?" Ethan smiled. "Let's just say, your little betrayal didn't sit well with Josh. And he's eager for a second chance." A second chance. I knew exactly what he meant. Josh wasn't done with me. He was coming back. And this time, he wasn't alone. My heart pounded. Josh was free. And now he had Ethan, his father, a man I hadn't seen in over 20 years, whispering in his ear. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about power. "Stay away from me," I said through clenched teeth. Ethan smirked. "Oh, but that's not up to me anymore." "What does that mean?" I demanded. He pulled a small envelope from his jacket and slid it across my kitchen counter. Open it. My hands trembled as I picked it up. I already knew I wouldn't like what was inside. I peeled it open and pulled out a photo. The moment I saw it, my blood ran cold. It was me, taken from a distance. At the grocery store. At the park. Walking into my house. Someone had been watching me. I gasped, shoving the photo back into the envelope. What the hell is this? Ethan leaned in, his voice low. A warning. You don't get it, do you? Ethan sighed, shaking his head. Josh isn't some lost little boy anymore. He's got fire in him. And now he's got me. What does he want? I asked, my throat tight. Ethan smiled. You. I took a step back. He wants revenge. I whispered. Ethan chuckled. No. He wants to prove himself. He tapped the envelope. You ruined his life. You put him behind bars. He thinks the only way to take back control is to, well, take something from you. My stomach twisted. What do you mean? Ethan tilted his head. You'll find out soon enough. I couldn't stay in that house another second. As soon as Ethan left, I locked all the doors, pulled the curtains shut, and started packing a bag. I needed to leave. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing. Josh and Ethan weren't going to stop. And I wasn't going to sit around waiting for them to make their move. Just as I zipped up my suitcase, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I picked up the phone. I didn't even get a chance to speak before I heard a voice on the other end. A voice I knew too well. Going somewhere, Mom? I froze, gripping the phone so tightly my fingers ached. Going somewhere, Mom? Josh's voice was calm, almost amused. Like he'd been expecting this. I swallowed hard. Josh, where are you? He chuckled. Close enough. I yanked open the curtain, scanning the street outside. Nothing. But that didn't mean he wasn't there. What do you want? I forced my voice to stay steady. You already know the answer. His voice was low. Dangerous. You betrayed me. You sent me away. And now? He let out a slow exhale. It's my turn. A shiver ran down my spine. Your turn for what? To take back what's mine. I swallowed. Josh, you need to stop this. Whatever your father told you, he's using you. Josh laughed coldly. Funny. That's exactly what he said about you. I clenched my jaw. Ethan had poisoned his mind completely. I'm not running from you, Josh. Don't lie to me. His voice snapped like a whip. I know you packed a bag. I know you're scared. And you should be. My breath hitched. He was watching. Right now. I stepped away from the window, heart pounding. Where are you, Josh? I whispered. Silence. Then a soft chuckle. Turn around, Mom. My stomach dropped. I turned, slowly, painfully, toward my darkened hallway. A shadow moved. Then he stepped into the light. Josh. His hair was slicked back. His suit was crisp, expensive. A far cry from the orange jumpsuit he'd worn in court. But his eyes, those were the same. Cold. Calculating. Dead. You changed the locks, he murmured, glancing at the door. Smart. But not smart enough. I took a step back, my hands shaking. How did you? You think I'd let a simple lock keep me away? He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. I grew up in this house, Mom. I know every way in and out. My throat tightened. Josh, you don't have to do this. He tilted his head. Do what? Whatever you're planning. His smile widened. I'm not planning anything. He stepped closer. I'm already doing it. I had to think fast. Josh was dangerous, but he was still my son. Somewhere deep, deep down was the little boy I had raised. Josh, please. I took a shaky breath. I know you're angry. I know you feel betrayed. But this isn't the way. He scoffed. And what is the way, Mom? Letting you live your perfect little life while I rot away. I never wanted that for you. Then why did you put me there? His voice cracked just for a second. I latched onto it. Because I was scared. Because I didn't want to believe you could do something like that. But I didn't want to lose you. I swallowed. I still don't. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in his eyes. But then it was gone. He sighed. You always were a good liar. Then, before I could react, he lunged. I barely had time to react. Josh lunged, his hands grabbing for me, his strength terrifying, his grip like steel. But I wasn't the same helpless mother he thought I was. I twisted away, my shoulder slamming into the wall as I stumbled into the kitchen. You think you can run? Josh sneered. He was faster than I remembered. Stronger. But I had one advantage. I knew this house better than anyone. Josh reached for me again, and this time I moved first. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a heavy glass vase, and smashed it against his arm. Ah! He howled, stumbling back. I didn't wait. I bolted for the back door, heart hammering. My hands fumbled with the lock. Click. I yanked it open. Freedom. But just as I stepped outside, a hand yanked me back. Josh dragged me to the floor, my back slamming against the cold tile. He stood over me, breathing hard, eyes wild. Why do you always fight me, Mom? His voice was low, dangerous. I looked up at him, and for the first time I saw it. He didn't just want revenge. He wanted control, and he wasn't going to stop until he got it. I had one shot left. As Josh loomed over me, I forced my voice to steady. You think I don't have a backup plan? I whispered. He froze. I smiled, even as fear clawed at my throat. I knew you'd come back, and I knew you wouldn't come alone. Josh's eyes flickered, just for a second, toward the front door. That was all I needed. I kicked him hard, right in the knee. He shouted, stumbling back, and I scrambled to my feet. But I wasn't running this time. I was fighting back. Josh roared, grabbing a knife from the counter. But before he could move, red and blue lights flashed outside. Sirens. Voices shouting. Josh's face twisted in rage. You called them? I didn't blink. What did you think I was doing while I was packing my bags? His grip tightened on the knife. Then, bang! The front door burst open. Officers swarmed inside. Drop the weapon. Josh turned, eyes darting between me and the cops, his mind racing. Don't move. His jaw clenched. Then finally, he let the knife clatter to the floor. His shoulders slumped. His face twisted with something I couldn't place. You really did it, he murmured. You really turned on me. My throat tightened. No, Josh. You turned on yourself. The officers grabbed him, cuffing his hands behind his back. This time there was no escape. No Ethan to bail him out. No second chances. Just justice. As they led him outside, he glanced back at me one last time. For the first time in a long time. He looked small, like the little boy I used to know. The next morning, I stood by my window, watching the sunrise. It was over. Josh was behind bars. Ethan was under investigation. And me? I was free. Not just from them, but from the fear that had ruled my life for so long. I had fought back. I had survived. And now, it was time to finally live. The end.